Some choices follow you for the rest of your life. You carry them quietly and hope no one notices the weight. Today's story is about a monster, but if you stay until the end, you'll find that the monster isn't really the point. What stands out are the choices made by the people around him, and what those choices cost. Everything begins with the sea. Minos wanted to be king of Crete. He had brothers, rivals, and no clear path to the throne. So he did what desperate men do. He made a deal with a god. He prayed to Poseidon, the god of the sea, and asked for a sign, something that would prove he was the rightful ruler. The sea answered. A bull rose from the water, pure white, almost blinding, perfect in every way. Poseidon had one condition: sacrifice the bull back to him. Minos became king, and the moment he held that power in his hands, he looked at the bull again, at that flawless white coat, at that magnificent animal. He swapped it out. He took the finest bull from his own herd, offered that one instead, and quietly moved Poseidon's bull into his stables. That was the moment he broke a promise to a god. And that was the moment every gear in this story began to turn. Poseidon, of course, knew exactly what Minos had done. He didn't strike Minos down directly. Instead, he cursed Minos' wife, Queen Pasiphaë. The myth tells us she was consumed by an unnatural desire for the bull. Most interpretations read this as Poseidon's revenge, aimed not at the king himself, but at everything the king loved. Pasiphaë went to find Daedalus, the most brilliant inventor of the age. He had come to Crete under a cloud. Legend says he had once tried to harm a talented nephew out of jealousy, and had fled to the island to escape the consequences. He was surviving by selling his genius to whoever needed it. What Pasiphaë asked of him was deeply disturbing. We don't know what went through Daedalus's mind, but he built it, a hollow wooden cow, crafted with terrifying precision. In time, Pasiphaë gave birth. What came into the world had the body of a man and the head of a bull. He was named Asterion, meaning star, but he would come to be known by a different name, the Minotaur, Minos' bull. This creature had never chosen anything, not his form, not his existence. He was simply the place where a god's revenge, a king's broken promise, and a cursed desire all converged into a single life. Minos had to decide what to do with this child, and his choice, as the myth tells it, was clear. He would hide him. He called for Daedalus again. The order was simple: build a place from which no one could escape. Daedalus built again, this time the Labyrinth, a vast network of winding corridors, designed so that anyone who entered would never find their way out. An exit existed, but no human could reach it alone. At the center of the labyrinth, the Minotaur was locked away. He had committed no crime. He had simply been born. But the king buried him in the dark, sealed away the living proof of his own deception. Somewhere, no one would ever have to look at it. It's hard not to read the labyrinth as more than architecture. It feels like a place built to contain what we refuse to face: guilt, consequence, the things we caused but won't own. But problems that get locked away don't disappear. They tend to come back larger. Years passed, and Athens was losing. Minos had won a war against Athens, and his terms were brutal. Every 9 years, Athens was to send 14 young people, 7 men, 7 women, into the labyrinth. None of them came back. When the third tribute came, a young Athenian hero named Theseus stepped forward voluntarily. He would go in, kill the Minotaur, and bring everyone home. His father, King Aegeus, held him close before he left. He made one request: if you come back alive, change the sails to white, so I can see from the cliffs that my son is still breathing. Theseus promised. When the Athenian ship reached Crete, someone was watching from the shore. Ariadne, daughter of Minos, and, through the strange turns of this story, half-sister to the Minotaur. The myth says she decided to help Theseus. The reasons differ depending on who tells the story, but the choice itself is never in doubt. She found him that night. She handed him a spool of thread and told him to tie one end to the entrance before going in. Follow the thread back, and you'll find your way out. She had one condition. Take me with you to Athens. Theseus agreed. Ariadne believed him. The labyrinth was dark. Theseus followed the thread deeper and deeper. The corridors kept splitting. The walls threw back the sound of his own footsteps, so it felt like something was walking beside him from every direction at once. And then he found him. The Minotaur was waiting at the center. Even in the dark, his eyes caught the light. Human eyes. Beneath that bull's head, looking back at Theseus. Human eyes. The myth moves quickly through what happens next. A fierce fight. Theseus wins. It doesn't linger on the details, and it tells us almost nothing about what Theseus felt in that moment. Maybe that silence is the point. He followed the thread back. He walked out of the labyrinth. The ship set sail for Athens. Ariadne was on board. Somewhere along the way, they stopped at the island of Naxos. Everyone went ashore. Ariadne stepped off the ship, and when morning came, the ship was gone, without her. Different versions of the myth fill in this moment differently. Some say the god Dionysus appeared to Theseus in a dream and claimed Ariadne as his own, that Theseus had no choice. Others say Theseus had simply fallen for someone else. Some records say Ariadne died on Naxos. Others say she eventually married Dionysus and lived a full life. But every version agrees on one thing. Theseus left her there. She had betrayed her father. She had become part of the chain of events that led to her half-brother's fate. She had walked away from Crete forever. She had placed everything on a single choice, and that choice ended on an empty beach at dawn, watching a ship disappear. Theseus sailed on toward Athens, and somewhere on that final stretch, he forgot to change the sails. The black sails stayed up. Why? The myth offers different answers. But the black sails were there when the ship came into view. Aegeus had been watching from the cliffs above Athens every single day. When he saw black sails on the horizon, he believed his son was dead. In despair, he is said to have leapt into the sea. That sea still carries his name, the Aegean. Theseus arrived to find his father was gone. The myth doesn't tell us what his face looked like in that moment. It only records what came next. He became king of Athens. So let's go back to the beginning. The Minotaur died because of Theseus, or because of Minos, or because of Poseidon. Depending on where you start pulling the thread, the answer changes. Aegeus died because Theseus forgot a promise, or because a king lied to a god years before his son was even born. The more you try to pin the blame on one person, the more tangled the story gets. Everyone here was acting out of something. Desire, fear, ambition, love, survival. And every one of those choices fed into a tragedy that none of them fully intended. Minos wanted to hold on to power. Daedalus sold his genius to survive. Ariadne made a decision and trusted it completely. Theseus wanted to be a hero. Aegeus just wanted his son to come home. Their choices, layered on top of each other, built something none of them saw coming. Daedalus designed the labyrinth, but if you look closely, the labyrinth started being built long before the first stone was ever laid. The moment Minos decided to deceive Poseidon, that single choice sent out ripples that twisted and crossed, and eventually carved out a center no one had planned for. Theseus had Ariadne's thread, one line leading back to the exit, but the price of that thread was leaving behind the person who gave it to him. He escaped the labyrinth and walked straight into another consequence, his father's death.
But the figure who stays with you longest is the Minotaur. But the figure who stays with you longest is the Minotaur. He never made a single choice. Not when to be born, not what he would look like, not where he would spend his life. Everything was decided around him and without him. And yet he stood at the center of it all. A god's revenge, a king's greed, an inventor's craft, and a desire that was never meant to exist. Every ripple in this story ended up at him, and we called him a monster. The myth barely gives him a voice. It doesn't tell us what he thought, what he felt, what it was like to exist the way he did. But it does give us one thing: the name he was given at birth, Asterion, the star. In the end, this myth asks us to remember him that way. The one locked at the center of the maze, the one who carried the weight of everyone else's choices, without ever being asked. And it leaves us with a question worth sitting with. What do we continue to keep hidden? As if refusing to name it could make it disappear? He never made a single choice. Not when to be born. Not what he would look like. Not where he would spend his life. Everything was decided around him and without him. And yet he stood at the center of it all. A god's revenge, a king's greed, an inventor's craft, and a desire that was never meant to exist. Every ripple in this story ended up at him, and we called him a monster. The myth barely gives him a voice. It doesn't tell us what he thought, what he felt, what it was like to exist the way he did. But it does give us one thing: the name he was given at birth, Asterion, the star. In the end, this myth asks us to remember him that way. The one locked at the center of the maze, the one who carried the weight of everyone else's choices, without ever being asked. And it leaves us with a question worth sitting with. What do we continue to keep hidden? As if refusing to name it could make it disappear?